We tend to place an almost mythical faith in motivation. We imagine it as the invisible force that will one day sweep in and transform our lives, propelling us to the gym at dawn, helping us launch that business, or finally pushing us to write the book that's been sitting in our minds for years. And when that surge of motivation arrives, it feels intoxicating. Everything seems possible. But here's the problem: it's a visitor, not a resident. Motivation is like a sudden rush of wind. It may move you forward for a moment, but it's unpredictable and fleeting. If you wait for it to return before taking action, you'll spend most of your life waiting. The danger is that we treat motivation as a prerequisite to action. We say to ourselves, I'll start when I feel ready, or I just need to get motivated. But readiness is an illusion. The truth is that action doesn't follow motivation. Often, it precedes it. We don't feel motivated because we've been still. We feel motivated because we've been moving. The spark comes not from sitting and thinking about what we want to do, but from engaging with it in some tangible way. Psychologically, this is because our brains are wired to conserve energy and avoid discomfort. Anything unfamiliar or effortful is initially resisted. Motivation tries to override that resistance, but its fuel tank is small. On days when you're tired, stressed, luck, or distracted, which is most days, it runs out quickly. That's why even the most disciplined people don't depend on motivation alone. They understand that if their progress relies on how they feel in the moment, it will be inconsistent at best. Philosophically, this reliance on motivation keeps us trapped in a conditional mindset. We become dependent on the right mood, the right circumstances, the right emotional climate before taking a step. It's as if we've outsourced our agency to something we can't control. And when that something doesn't show up, we take it as a sign that now is not the time, reinforcing the cycle of inaction. The result is a life where change happens in bursts, but not in sustained waves. But the real shift begins when you stop treating motivation as the foundation for your actions and start treating it as a bonus. If it shows up, great, you can move faster. If it doesn't, you move anyway. This is where systems come in. Systems replace the unstable rhythm of motivation with the steady pulse of habit and structure. They take the decision making out of the moment. Yeah, so you're not asking yourself, do I feel like doing this? But rather, what's the next step in the system? When you operate this way, you're no longer relying on the unpredictable winds of inspiration. You've built an engine that runs regardless of the weather. And ironically, you'll often find that motivation begins to appear more frequently, not because you've been waiting for it, but because you've been creating the momentum that fuels it. So perhaps the real question isn't how do I get motivated, but how do I keep moving when I'm not? The answer to that question will shape far more of your future than any momentary rush of inspiration ever could. A system is more than just a plan written in a notebook or an idea floating in your head. It's the structure that carries your actions forward, even when your energy or enthusiasm is low. Think of it as the rails on which your daily train runs. Without rails, every journey is a question of direction and willpower. With rails, movement is inevitable. This is why systems are so powerful. They take the uncertainty and decision-making out of your day and replace them with a repeatable rhythm that keeps you in motion. Most people think they fail because they lack motivation, but often the deeper reason is that they lack a system. Without a system, every action requires a fresh decision, and each decision is a negotiation with yourself. Should I go to the gym today? Should I start working on this project now or later? Every time you ask those questions, you open the door for excuses. Systems close that door. They remove the need for constant inner debate by defining in advance what happens next. Psychologically, this is freeing. Decision fatigue is real. The human mind only has so much cognitive energy for choices each day. When you build a system, you automate the most important ones. You conserve mental bandwidth for creativity, problem solving, and meaningful work instead of wasting it on deciding whether or not to take the actions you already know you should take. Philosophically, a system represents a commitment to process over impulse. It acknowledges that life is unpredictable and the mind is restless, yet action can still be consistent if it's anchored in structure. A system says, this is what I do, regardless of how I feel or what's happening outside of me. In this way, it's not just a productivity tool, it's a discipline of self-governance. You're no longer at the mercy of fleeting states of mind. The beauty of a system is that it works silently in the background. You don't have to wake up each morning and summon the will to reinvent your day. The system tells you, here's the next step, and all you have to do is step into it. Over time, this turns action into habit, habit into identity, and identity into lasting change. Think about a professional musician. They don't rely on sudden bursts of inspiration to practice. They have a system, specific times, specific drills, specific routines that keep them improving whether or not they're in the mood. And paradoxically, this commitment to structure creates more opportunities for inspiration because they're always in motion, always engaged with their craft. When you have a system, progress becomes less about the size of today's effort and more about the consistency of showing up. It's no longer about moving in great leaps when you feel like it, but in steady steps that compound over time. If you can build a life where the important things happen automatically without relying on a burst of energy or a perfect mood, you've set yourself free from one of the greatest traps of human behavior. Because once the system is in place, momentum is no longer a question, it's a certainty. Most people measure their progress by the distance between where they are and where they want to be. Goals give us that sense of direction. They act as a finish line, a destination on the map. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Goals can be useful for clarity. But the problem is, goals are moments in time, while life is an ongoing process. When we fixate too much on the destination, we neglect the path that gets us there. And once the goal is reached, the momentum that carried us often vanishes, leaving us without a reason to keep moving. This is why so many people achieve a big milestone, lose the weight, land the promotion, hit the sales target, only to slide backward. They had been running toward a point on the horizon, not building the habits that could sustain them beyond it. Without a system to maintain and grow their progress, they find themselves starting over again and again. The shift comes when you stop asking, what do I want to achieve? And start asking, what process can I commit to that will naturally lead me toward that outcome? A goal might say, I want to run a marathon. A system says, I run 4 times a week, regardless of what's on my calendar. The difference is subtle but profound. A goal depends on a future event. A system depends on what you do today. Psychologically, this changes the way your mind experiences success. If your sense of accomplishment comes only when you reach a specific outcome, you're postponing satisfaction until some distant point. That's a fragile way to luck because it leaves most of your days feeling incomplete. But if success is measured by whether you followed your process today, you create a daily sense of achievement. You're no longer waiting to be successful. You're living successfully right now. Philosophically, this approach asks us to detach from the fixation on results and instead root ourselves to action. It echoes the wisdom found in both ancient philosophy and modern behavioral science. We can influence outcomes, but we don't control them. What we control is our input, the repeated intentional actions that create the conditions for those outcomes to emerge. By focusing on the process, we practice a form of humility and patience. We accept that results are the natural consequence of consistent effort, not the constant demand of our will. And here's the paradox: when you stop obsessing over results and start obsessing over the process, results tend to take care of themselves. You're no longer chasing them, you're building the habits and systems that make them inevitable. So instead of seeing your life as a series of goals to conquer, see it as a set of processes to refine. Because in the end, the question isn't, did I get there? It's, am I becoming the kind of person who always moves forward no matter the milestone? The destination may inspire you, but it's the process that will carry you there and far beyond. Most people design their routines as if they're building them for an idealized version of themselves, the version that always wakes up early, feels energized, and never gets distracted. But that version rarely shows up in real life. In reality, we're working with a mind that gets tired, a body that seeks comfort, and habits that have been shaped over years, not days. If you try to build a system that requires you to be perfect to follow it, you're setting yourself up to fail. The real art is designing systems that work with human nature, not against it. When we think about human behavior, one thing is clear: we follow the path of least resistance. If something is easy to do, we're more likely to do it. If it's hard, even if we should do it, we'll often avoid it. This isn't laziness, it's efficiency. The brain is wired to conserve energy and avoid friction. So, luck, the most effective systems, don't fight this tendency. They shape it. They make the right action simple, obvious, and rewarding, while making the wrong actions inconvenient, hidden, or less satisfying. Psychologically, this is why environment design is such a powerful force. If your workspace is clear, your tools are ready, and the distractions are minimized, you'll find it easier to get started. If your phone is buzzing beside you, or your running shoes are buried in the back of the closet, you're increasing the activation energy needed to act. Systems that align with human nature remove these unnecessary points of friction. Philosophically, luck, it's about humility, accepting that willpower is not an endless resource and that discipline is less about heroic bursts of effort and more about shaping conditions so that the desired behavior happens almost automatically. This is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. The most disciplined people often appear that way not because they're constantly battling temptation, luck, but because they've structured their lives so that temptation rarely shows up in the first place. Imagine 2 people trying to eat healthier. One stocks their fridge with fresh produce, keeps water within arm's reach, and places the snacks in a high cupboard that requires effort to reach. The other keeps chips on the counter and soda in the fridge, relying on willpower to resist them. Who will succeed in the long term? The difference isn't just in motivation, it's in the design of the system. luck. When you align your systems with how people actually behave rather than how you wish they behaved, you stop fighting yourself. Your daily choices no longer feel like constant uphill battles. Progress becomes less about forcing discipline and more about flowing with a structure that naturally leads you toward your goals. So the question isn't just, what do I want to do? It's, how can I make it almost impossible not to do it? If you can answer that, you've already removed half the struggle. And in most cases, that's enough to carry you the rest of the way. The deepest and most sustainable systems are the ones that grow out of identity. When your actions are connected to who you believe yourself to be, they stop feeling like isolated tasks and start becoming expressions of who you are. This is where the real transformation happens, not when you simply do the thing, but when doing it feels as natural as breathing because it reflects your sense of self. Most people start the other way around. They focus on outcomes. First, I want to run a marathon. I want to write a book. I want to start a business. They set the goal, then try to force the behavior. But this approach creates constant tension because your daily actions still feel separate from your identity. You may be running, but you still think of yourself as someone who's trying to become a runner. There's a subtle difference between that and simply thinking, I am a runner. The first requires proof every day. The second simply requires living out what you already believe about yourself. Psychologically, this shift matters because humans are wired to act in ways that are consistent with their self-image. If you see yourself as a healthy person, eating well doesn't feel like punishment. It's just what you do. If you see yourself as a leader, speaking up in a meeting doesn't feel like a risk. It's an extension of your role. And when your systems are tied to identity, they no longer feel like external rules you're following. They feel like natural behaviors you would choose anyway. Philosophically, this is about moving from doing to being. Outcomes are temporary, identities are enduring. You might finish a project or achieve a goal, but if it's not tied to who you believe you are, the behavior often stops there. Identity-based systems bypass this problem by making the behavior self-perpetuating. You don't have to summon motivation to act in alignment with yourself. The very thought of not acting feels like breaking something essential. The key is to start small and let your actions serve as evidence for the identity you want to adopt. If you want to be someone who writes, don't wait until you've written a novel. Start by writing a few sentences every day. Each repetition reinforces the story you tell yourself about who you are. Over time, the story becomes the reality, and the reality shapes the future. When your systems are built on identity, you stop worrying about whether you'll stay motivated in the future because you've created a self-concept that makes the behavior inevitable. You're not forcing yourself to go to the gym. You're living as the kind of person who trains. You're not trying to eat better. You're living as someone who values their health. The system is no longer something you do. It's something you are. So the real question isn't, what do I want to achieve? It's, who do I want to become? Because once you decide that, every system you build becomes a natural extension of your identity, and the results will take care of themselves.